Chapter 6, First Day. Battlestar Xanthi Port Hangar Deck Day, 1825, 1905 hours. Ensign Gaius Nash was as stiff as a board as he stepped off the shuttle. He had spent the trip sleeping. But now he was wide awake. He looked around the hangar deck and took in the organized chaos around him. Then he saw a Markroman II Viper. Nice. He walked up to the Viper, then ran his hand along the hull. "What a beauty you are. Too bad for you she's already taken, Ensign." He turned around to see Major Teresa Layton and snapped to attention. At ease, Ensign Nash. He relaxed a little. "So you've taken a liking to Marcy." "Marcy, ma'am." Nash looked at the Viper. "Is she?" "No, this is Lieutenant Peter Aurelius Byrd. Officially, it's Viper 283, but he calls it Marcy." "This is Bomb Rider's Byrd, just my luck." "Don't worry, Bomb Rider is not that jealous, but talking about birds, follow me." He followed Layton to a battered old Raptor. "This is Raptor 204, and she's all yours. Does she come with an ECO, ma'am?" "That's me," a voice said. A woman with red hair, blue eyes, and a very attractive figure appeared from behind the Raptor. "Ensign Gaius Nash, meet your ECO, Chief Petty Officer Tammy Byron. We call her Ace." "So, what's your call sign, Gaius?" "I'm fresh of the boat, so I'm call signless at the moment." "I'm counting on you to fix that, Ace," Layton said. "For now, get Widowmaker up and running. Then report to me in the pilot's ready room." Layton left them with the Raptor. Nash looked at Byron, the Widowmaker. He pointed to the Raptor. "Why is she called?" "Because she is only 3 weeks and you are her 7th pilot." "Bloody hell, I'm stuck with a jinxed bird." "I'm afraid so." Ace sighed. "I'm her 3rd ECO. Rumor has it that they died rather nasty death." "So, what's a good call sign for the pilot of a doomed ship? Dead man? Let's not tempt the gods." Ace gave him a nod and looked at the Widowmaker again. "How about Rufus?" "It's the old Capricorn for rubber and you are supposed to steer her." "Rufus it is. So where do we start, Ace?" "Well, to begin with, we need to figure out what is broken." She dove into the cockpit and came back with the clipboard. "Here's the checklist. You want to read or check?" "I'll check." "You read." "Yes, sir." He got into the pilot's seat and Ace began reading. Battlestar Xanthi Pilot's Ready Room Day, 1825, 2300 hours. It had taken an hour to find out exactly how bad the damage was. The battle that had killed the last pilot had also put the Widowmaker through the ringer. They had left the ship in the care of 6 knuckle-draggers, who had told them it would take 5 hours to get her repaired. Nash had wanted to report in, but Ace had insisted that he had to find his bunk and settle in. After that, they had gotten an hour of shut-eye and a meal. Rested and fed, they had stepped into the ready room to find Layton briefing a full room of pilots on their patrol assignments. Nash leaned closer to Ace. "Looks like we're about to get our first flight. That's why I insisted on food and sleep, Rufus." "Thank the Lords." Layton finished the briefing and the pilots left. Then she turned to Nash and Ace. They both snapped to attention. At ease, Nash and Ace relaxed. "We're sending a large patrol group to check out a nearby asteroid belt, which leaves us with a problem. If we encounter the Cylons, we've got very little ammo." She pointed to a whiteboard with a map on it. The map showed the asteroid belt and its surroundings. "So I'm sending you 2 here." She pointed to a dot on the map. "Ammo Station 4, fly in, load up as much ammo as you can and get back here." "Yes, ma'am," Nash and Ace said. "Any questions?" "Do we have more detailed maps of that area, ma'am?" Nash asked. "Of course. Stay here, Ensign." Layton went into the next room while Ace turned to Nash. "Maps, Rufus?" "The toasters are not stupid," he pointed to the map. "Ammo Station 4 is near the edge of the belt, and 2 moons. If I was them, I'd set up an ambush somewhere near those moons or inside the belt." "Exactly." "The knuckle-draggers are still working on the Widowmaker. Let's use the time to do our homework." Layton came back with a thick folder which she handed to Nash. "Ensign, Chief, you are dismissed. You too have work to do." They gave her a salute and walked out. Widowmaker Cockpit Day, 1826. 0705 hours. The folder had contained several photos of Ammo Station 4, along with 3 detailed maps. 2 of the areas around the moons and 1 of the section of the belt nearest to the ammo station. Nash and Ace had studied it all and planned their course. Ace had calculated that the trip would take about 6 hours. She figured about an hour to load the Raptor and refuel, followed by a 7-hour trip back. They were taking a different course back, which made the return trip longer. At the moment, Nash was soundly asleep and snoring like a chainsaw while Ace flew the ship. Then the dratties beeped. "Rufus, we've got trouble." Nash snapped awake and bolted to his chair while Ace slid over. "Ace, what do we have?" "I'm reading 5, no, make that 6 Cylon raiders." "Are they attacking the station?" "No," the dratties beeped. "Frack, they're heading right for us." Nash checked their position. They were on the last legs of the trip. It took them near the closest of the 2 moons. The moon had a thick atmosphere, which the Cylons had been using for cover. "Hang on, I'm turning her around." He yanked the stick to the left and turned the Raptor, then opened the throttle to full. "Ace, activate the rear gun. Blast those bastards to hell. You did notice that there are SIX of them and only 1 of us." "I'm working on it." He threw the ship through several wild turns, which gave Ace time to man the rear gun. "Ready," she opened up with the gun. "Come on, you bastards." Nash looked at the dratties' display. Ahead of them was nothing but open space. If they kept going that way, they were sitting ducks. So he put the Widowmaker into a wild turn, which put them on a course back to the moon. The toasters closed, but Ace was no slough. She nailed 1 of the chasing raiders. Got 1, they were approaching the moon. He took them into the atmosphere and the raiders kept following. Nash took the Raptor into a gas stream, which pushed the ship along faster. Then he took the ship down and fired the brake thrusters. 1 of the raiders moved straight into the crosshairs of the rear guns. Ace blasted it to pieces. "And that's 2. She tried to fire again, but the gun jammed. She jumped from the seat and bolted forward. Turrets fracked up. "Hang on." He put the Widowmaker into a loop. Missiles. Ace fired 2 missiles. 1 hit home. The other one missed its initial target but clipped a second raider and exploded. The raider spun out of control, diving deeper into the atmosphere until the pressure crushed it. 2 toasters remaining. Keep dodging them, Rufus. Sounds like a plan. Missiles? Locking on. Ace fired 2 more missiles. This time, both missed. They detonated behind the raiders, doing 0 damage. This left them with 2 missiles. Ace locked them on target. "Rufus, now would be a good time for a prayer." "I'm not that good with a prayer." "Try anyway." Okay, you dear lords of Kabul, please don't let this blow up in our faces." "So say we all." Ace fired the last 2 missiles. They both hit a single raider. "Great, now what?" "Now we run." Nash put the Widowmaker on a straight line for the ammo station and floored it. Alas, the toaster was faster. "He's gaining on us, Rufus." "I know, Ace." "Now, shut up and let me think." The toaster launched a salvo and Nash threw the Widowmaker into a roll. It was barely enough to dodge the salvo, and then the dratties beeped. "What is?" He looked up and saw the answer. They were coming up on the Madman Cluster, a collection of asteroids near Ammo Station 4 that no sane pilot would go near. But the toaster was closing and they were out of weapons, so he gunned it for the cluster. "Rufus, what the frack are you doing?" "Playing Capricorn roulette. Hold on." They reached the cluster and dove in, barely avoiding a large asteroid. Alas, so did the toaster. Nash cursed and threw them through more wild turns as they dodged the rocks. The toaster tried to nail them, but hit nothing but rock. "They're still back there, Rufus." "I noticed, Ace." He spotted an area with dense rock movement and took them in. The rocks whizzed past left and right. Nash cursed as he dodged the boulders, but kept the ship in one piece. This time around, however, the toaster was not so lucky. It was hit by one of the rocks and spun out of control. 3 more rocks hit it, finishing the job. "Yes, now get us the frack out of here, Rufus. Keep holding on, this is going to be bumpy." He turned the Raptor upwards and began weaving them out of the cluster. When they finally passed out of the cluster, Nash and Ace both released a huge sigh. He checked the dratties' display. "Nothing on screen," Ace said. "Good, time to get out of here." Nash turned the Widowmaker towards the ammo station. He gave Ace a nod and she activated the wireless. Raptor 204 to Ammo Station 4, requesting clearance to land. Clearance granted. The station's LSO said, "Bring her in at Landing Bay 1. Wilco, 204 out." She turned to Nash. "You heard the man, take her in, Rufus." They approached the station. It was a large disc with 2 large cylinders underneath. The left one was Landing Bay 1. Nash steered the Widowmaker into it. The crazy last leg of their trip was over. Battlestar Xanthi Duty Locker, 24-day 1826, 2030. It had taken an hour to get the Widowmaker ready to take off again. Then they had spent another hour getting it loaded to the brim. After a short but intense debriefing with the station's commander, they had headed back to the Xanthi. Then they had spent another hour unloading the Raptor. After reporting in to Leighton, they had been ordered to get some shut-eye. So they were going to do just that. Nash took the upper bunk while Ace took the lower one. As she lay down on his bunk, Ace suddenly realized how drained she felt. Her body told her to sleep for 2 days. Rufus beat her to it, however, as she noticed from his chainsaw snoring. As she closed her eyes, she realized that she had been bloody lucky, and that next time they might not make it back, but for now they were safe, which was enough for her, so she let the world melt away. Chapter 7, The Handover. With her eyes closed, the world was a soft mattress, and there were the smells of the room. The smell of blankets, sweaty socks, and dozens of other things, but that was not all. For the world was not complete without the sounds. The footsteps in the corridor, the talking of people and distant humming of machinery. All in all, it was a nice universe. As long as she kept her eyes closed, so she didn't want to open her eyes. She just wanted to lie here and let the moment continue. Alas, the universe had other plans. "Colonel Leighton," a voice said. "The commander sent me to get you, ma'am." She sighed and opened her eyes. Battlestar Xanthi Duty Locker, 47-day 2004, 0805 hours. Colonel Teresa Leighton swung her legs out of the bunk and got up. She recognized the owner of the voice as Ensign Ralph Dodger Wallace, a Nugget Raptor ECO. "Lead the way, Ensign." "Yes, ma'am." They walked out of the room. "May I ask you something, ma'am?" "What on your mind, Dodger?" "Well, ma'am, you're the XO. You have your own quarters. So why am I still sleeping in my old bunk?" She smiled. "Somebody once told me that this war is crazy, and he was right, so I've developed a habit or two to keep me sane. Lying in that bunk reminds me that there are some things the toasters can't take away, no matter what happens." As they walked, her mind drifted to all the things that had changed since the Battle of Hades and Misery. The air wing had been expanded to 240 Vipers and 96 Raptors, but that wasn't the big tactical change. Before the battle, Xanthi had been a lone wolf. Now she had 4 support vessels. And Colonel Mitchell had been promoted to commander of one of those ships 154 days ago, which was how Leighton had ended up as XO. Mitchell had taken the only candidate Major Miller with her to serve as her XO. Her old job as CAG had gone to now Major Dan McIvers, with Captain Pete Aurelius as his second-in-command. As for McIvers' old co-pilot, Tyler Williams, he had made full lieutenant and now the ranking LSO for the starboard flight pod. It had not been a willing assignment. On day 1985, he had lost his left leg, so Williams had been forced to choose between retirement or becoming an LSO. He had angrily picked the latter. They reached the commander's quarters, ending her time to ponder. Wallace announced their presence. "Come on in, Colonel," Magnus said. "You're dismissed, Ensign." Wallace left, while Leighton followed Magnus into his quarters. They sat on the bench. "I'm afraid I've got a good news, bad news situation." "Let's hear it, sir." "I just got new orders from the Admiralty." "And how bad is it?" "I've been promoted, but not in rank. I'm being transferred to the Atlanta." The Atlanta had 7 support ships, which made it a highly desired command. It was a high-profile post, and her last 2 commanders had both become admirals. And Xanthi, "Who's the new?" He gave her a look. No, not me, I'm afraid so." She took a deep breath. "I was hoping for a little more time as XO, to be honest, sir. That's how I felt when they plucked me from being XO on the Archeron. When are you leaving, sir? That's the really bad news. The shuttle is already here and I'm already packed. Leighton felt her blood grow old. She looked around and realized that he was telling the truth. All the commander's personal things were gone. Then a smile grew on her face. This was typical of Magnus. He hated brass, protocol, and most of all, being the center of attention. He simply wanted to leave in silence. Leighton nodded. I understand, sir, but I'll need an XO. Have you got anybody in mind? There are a lot of good officers. Use your instinct to pick your XO. He reached into his pocket and took out a note, which he gave to Leighton. But here are 5 names my instincts tell me you should put on your short list. Thank you, sir. She put the note away. Any other tips, sir? When you can, get some R&R. It rarely happens and nobody has any use for a burnt-out commander. Magnus got up and went to his desk. He opened the drawer and took out 2 boxes. For a moment, Leighton thought back to the last time Magnus had done that. It had been when she had promoted to CAG, then she pushed the memory away. And now the last thing, to begin with your pips. Magnus gave her one of the boxes, which she opened to find her new rank pips. She closed the box. But those can wait, Magnus said. Sir, I don't understand. He handed her the second box, which she opened to find a 1-qubit coin. I got that from the guy who oversaw the construction of the Xanthi. It's a lucky charm. Do you really believe that? To be honest, I don't know. But with the way this war is going, do you really want to risk it? Good point. Leighton put the coin in her pocket. Magnus nodded and closed the drawer. That's it. Good luck, Commander, Magnus said. Good luck, Commander. They shook hands and Magnus walked out. Leighton looked around, realizing it was now hers. It suddenly felt huge. She took a couple of deep breaths and then removed her old pips. She opened the box and put on her new pips. Her shoulders suddenly felt like somebody had put a heavy weight on them. She put her old pips in the box. Soon, she would be offering them to somebody else. But for now, there were other things to do. To begin with, she would have to tell the crew. No time like the present. And so, Commander Teresa Leighton walked out of her quarters and went to work. Chapter 8, 2,000 days later. Battlestar Xanthi XO's quarters day 4000, 0715. Colonel Tyler Williams finished dressing and sat behind his desk. A thick pile of paperwork was waiting there for him. Fortunately, the bulk was housekeeping, so that could wait. He put those papers aside and was left with a small pile. These were personnel transfers. 2 of them were cooks being transferred to the Columbia. Xanthi's chef had been replaced 2 months ago, and the new guy had streamlined things enough for the 2 cooks to be transferred. And the kitchens on Columbia were a fracking mess. Williams had seen the list of complaints from the crew, and it was huge. How the frack did I land this job? He had been a bitter LSO until day 2205, when there had been a fire in the starboard flight pod. He had managed to drag 7 guys to safety before the folks in CIC had closed the doors and vented the compartments. It had made his realize that he still had what it took to be a colonial officer, even without his left leg. Which he had lost on day 1985, but that was another story. He had managed to climb the ranks to full colonel and ship's XO, but that was not important now. He had other things to worry about. He signed the transfer orders for the cooks, then opened the 3rd and last folder. About time, Williams muttered. Xanthi's air wing was mainly made out of nuggets, a fact her CAG Lieutenant Colonel Dan McIvers had been complaining about. This was because a lot of her experienced pilots had been killed. Fred Taptance Rogers, Anton Walker Vale, and Dennis Tiger Kyle were all dead. Even Ralph Dodger Wallace, a very promising Raptor ECO, was gone. To make things worse, Peter Baumrider Aurelius had left on day 3495 to become the CAG aboard the Atlanta. He had been promoted to major along with the transfer. This had left McIvers without a good second-in-command, until now. Captain Gaius Rufus Nash, Battlestar Anubis CAG. Nash had served aboard the Xanthi until day 2909, when he had been transferred to the Orion-class Anubis. On day 3639, he had been promoted to captain and made CAG, And he had done well. Assignment to the Anubis was voluntary. When Nash had become CAG, she had carried 4 Vipers. Now, she carried 12 Vipers and 2 Raptors. Tilda, thank you, Admiral Magnus. Tilda Peter Magnus had been promoted to Admiral several months ago. While other admirals moved to Fleet HQ, Magnus was still aboard the Atlanta. Williams signed Nash's file and headed out. It was time to give McIvers the good news. Raptor 204, Widowmaker Cockpit Day, 4004. 0700. It was good to be behind the controls of Widowmaker again. Gaius Nash flew the old girl into Xanthi's starboard flight pod and put her down right on the mark. In the back, his old ECO Tammy Ace Byron whistled, but things had changed. These days, she was held the rank of warrant officer and flew the Widowmaker herself. In fact, she was the CO of the Wild Bunch, a pack of 4 Raptors crewed by enlisted men and women. Just like the old days, Ace. Just like the old days, Rufus, she said and smiled. It's good to have you back. The wing needs leadership. Lucky. Lucky was Dan McIvers' call sign. Does what he can, but he's only one man. He keeps things running fine, but we need somebody who can boost morale, and that's you. Great, no pressure at all then. Hey, they, and you, don't pay me to pull punches. Rufus grinned. Ace was right on the money always, and he had an idea or two on how to whip the air wing into shape. Of course, he would have to run them by Lucky first. Still, he had to begin somewhere. The elevator engaged, and they began lowering into the hangar. Battlestar Xanthi Starboard Hangar Day 4004, 0827. Nash had settled into his bunk getting some shut-eye and showered. Now he was walking across the hangar and taking notes. As he saw it, the problem with the Big X was that the last stretch of training which she covered took 9 months. And in a war with the current numbers of casualties, that was really bad news. Tilda 1 bullet in the wrong place and poof, it's all gone. Tilda, it was a hard truth that was a killer for morale. Tilda, no way to change that. Tilda. Planning to take over the hangar, Rufus. A male voice said. Nice to see you're still around, Fixer. Thomas Fixer Wallace was the Big X's chief of the deck for the starboard hangar. While the port hangar had been suffering from high overturn, Wallace had been around since day 1107. He had been handpicked by Commander Magnus for the job. The 2 men exchanged smiles. Fixer gestured towards a nearby Raptor, and the 2 of them sat down inside it. How are things going, Fixer? Well, I presume Ace told you about morale. Yeah, I got the cliff notes, but I need the scuttlebutt and the opinion of somebody who's been here for a while. Nash began. I figure if I can do something about the top 10 troublemakers, it'll make a dent. So what intel can you give me? Okay, I hope you brought plenty of paper, because there's plenty to tell. Nash nodded and Wallace began talking. What they didn't notice was that they were watched. Commander Layton and Lieutenant Colonel McIvers were watching from the catwalk. The commander looked at the CAG and smiled, who smiled back. They both had the feeling that things were about to change for the better. You know, he might end up with your job, Layton began. What do you think about that? Well, based on Commander Engel's reports, Commander Rick Engels was the skipper of the Battlestar Anubis. He's got the chops and the leadership skills, and he's got the charm too. And what about you then? The way this war has been going, I'll be dead when that happens. Maybe not. She took out a folder. This just came through the pipeline. The Yashuman lost her XO 2 weeks ago, and there is a short list with just 3 names on it, and you are at the top, which means that the job is yours if you want it. McIvers took the folder. Think about it, Daniel. You think that's what they are hedging their bets? That they send Nash over for that reason? Fleet Command is not that smart. Admiral Magnus, on the other hand, is well-connected enough and cunning enough to. McIvers nodded. It sounded like the old man all right. Magnus had not survived this long by being stupid. Before he could reply, the PA system came to life, and the voice of Colonel Williams told them that there was a fire in the port flight pod. He ordered the fast response teams to do their thing. But McIvers and Layton were already on the move. Battlestar Xanthi Port Flight Pod Day 4004, 0830. McIvers' first instinct was that they had been attacked by the Cylons, but that was not the case. A malfunctioning welder had exploded, with catastrophic results. The knuckle dragger using it had been working on a Markroman 3 Viper, which had caught fire and gone up in a massive blast. There were wounded and charred crew members all over the place. McIvers cursed when he saw the chaos. It took everything the fire suppression system had to keep the blaze from spreading. Everybody who wasn't wounded or burned was fighting the fire with handheld gear. "We have to clear the section and vent it," Layton said, "or we'll lose the whole pod." She grabbed one of the wounded and began carrying him out. McIvers grabbed another and did the same. As he put the man down, the fast responders arrived and pitched in. Colonel Williams' voice came over the PA again. =//= all hands, prepare for venting of port flight pod, Section B. =//= there was tons of stress in his voice. =//= all hands, clear Section B, right now. Repeat, clear Section B =//=. McIvers ran back in and grabbed another wounded crew members. Around him, the knuckle draggers and responders were doing their best to get everybody who was still alive out. He spotted Layton carrying another wounded crew member. A loud rumble announced that they had to get out of Dodge because the section doors were closing. He made it out and put his load down. As he did so, there was a loud thud, which was a problem because there should have been 2. One for each set of doors. Crap. He looked back and saw that the far doors were closed, but the near doors were jammed. They were blocked by a piece of debris from the Viper. Layton spotted it as well and bolted. McIvers joined her and they tried to clear the doors. It refused to budge. 2 knuckle draggers came to their aid, but to no avail. "It has to be pulled from the inside," Layton said. "I'll do." That was as far as McIvers got before Layton decked him with a single punch. She reached into her pocket and took out her lucky 1-qubit coin. She threw it to one of the knuckle draggers, who caught it. The look on the man's face was one of horror. Nearly everybody aboard the Big X knew what this coin was, and what it meant that she had given him this coin. "For Colonel Williams," she said. "Vent the moment these doors close, that's an order." "Yes, Commander." She passed through the crack and pulled the debris clear. The doors slammed shut. And 12 seconds later, Section B was vented. Chapter 9, Beware. Battlestar Xanthi War Room Day 4570, 0755. Colonel Dan McIvers looked at the tactical map and nodded. Xanthi had just gotten a whole shipload of tactical orders and intelligence reports. McIvers had come in at 0745 to plot them all on the map. He was preparing a briefing for the commander and the XO. As if they smelled that McIvers had things all set up, both officers came in. After Layton's death, Tyler Williams had been promoted to commander of the Big X. He had offered McIvers the XO slot, but he had turned it down, and it was not the only job he had turned away, because he had also been offered the XO slot on the Battlestar Yashuman. The reason why was simple. Layton's death had caused morale to take a nosedive, and the last thing the air group needed was to lose its own CO as well, so he had stayed put. Fortunately, Fleet Headquarters had noticed what had happened and taken action. They had promoted McIvers to full colonel as a way of saying that he wasn't going anywhere, and they had sent the Xanthi a new XO who had arrived on day 4017. Colonel Zachary Zach Peters. Before his reassignment, he had been the LSO on the Athena with the rank of lieutenant colonel. After, he had been promoted to a full colonel. He had proved to be quite a catch. Peters had helped him and Captain Nash to fast-pace several plans to improve morale, and it was starting to have effect. But that was not why they were here. He took a deep breath and turned his attention to the table. "Perfect timing, gents," he began. "I've got everything ready to go." "Okay, what's the grand plan, Lucky?" Peters said. "Here, smack in the middle, we have a nameless ice rock. The toasters have a major presence there, and that's why we're sending Galactica, Columbia, and Athena to take it out. The brass is calling it Operation Raptor Talon. Other than that, they're keeping everything under wraps. Alas, there's also a Cylon base here." He pointed to a red cycle on the map. "Proteus outpost. We lost it in the second year of the war, and if those toasters jump in, those Battlestars will get slaughtered," Williams added. "Right. Fortunately, the two bases are connected by a communications relay. The Battlestar Anubis, backed up by the support ships Loki and Berserk, is assigned to taking it out. Major Nash reports they are ready to go." Gaius Nash had been promoted to Major on day 4565. He had then been asked to go to the Anubis to help prepare with the attack on the relay. "Where does the Big X fit in?" Peters asked. "The brass wants a nice, big smoke screen to hide the plan behind. So, we are to take out these two relays at the Caesar Nebula. That would cut communications between these 5 bases," McIvers pointed to 5 spots on the map, "and keep the toasters guessing where we are going to strike." "Okay, let's see what we have on those relays," Williams said. "It isn't much." McIvers grabbed a folder from a nearby workstation. He opened it and started putting pictures on the main display. "We're going to need a recon mission before we plan the attack, or else this whole thing is going to blow up in our face. And I have an idea or two on how to get the data we need." "You have the floor, Lucky." McIvers nodded and began explaining what he had in mind. "Raptor 204, cockpit day 4570, 0930. Ace put the Widowmaker through a slow turn and checked the Dratty's display. So far, it was empty. At 0815, the Wild Bunch had been called to the pilot's ready room for a briefing. The brass needed a recon mission to 2 toaster comm relays. Ace got the feeling that it was part of a bigger plan, which involved blowing said relays to 1,000 tiny pieces. Of course, Lucky was smart enough not to confirm any of it, but they both knew what she was thinking. "Nothing but clear skies on my screen, boss," a male voice said from the back. "Keep your eyes on that screen, Roy," Ace began. "This sneaking session could into a hot party any second." Roy was actually called Donald Antonius. He had taken the pilot's seat on day 2909, a couple of hours after Nash had left for the Anubis. Back then, he had been a crewman, but he had worked his way up the ranks in record time. And he had done it the proper way, with 0 connections and lots of hard work. But finally, he had hit a ceiling at Petty Officer First Class. In fact, it was the highest rank anybody on the Wild Bunch, except Ace, because she was the CO could achieve. And then, Gaius Nash cursed the man had approached her and convinced her to accept a battlefield commission to ensign. It raised the ceiling for the rest of her squadron to warrant officer. Roy had been one of 3 people to get promoted after that. "How are our swallows looking, Ice?" "Primed and ready to go, Skipper." Normally, the co-pilot's seat was empty so that the ECO could sit there if needed. But Ace had gotten the feeling that this mission would be tricky. So all 4 Raptors were traveling 3-load on this one. For the Widowmaker, the extra pair of hands was crewman Felix Henderson. He was a rookie, having arrived 2 days ago, but he had already earned the call sign Ice for saving a knuckle-dragger. The man had suffered a heart attack, and Ice's cool head had saved him. "Don't go melting on me, Ice." "Yes, Skipper." Ace looked at the Dratty's screen again. They were approaching their first target through the Caesar Nebula at full sublight speed. They had jumped in as close as they could without being detected. She could see it as a dot at the far edge of Dratty's range. This was where the soup would stick to the spoon, but so far, there were no unwelcome guests. Ace looked at Ice, who was biting his lower lip. Fortunately, he was looking more surprised than panicked. Ice. We're the Dratties, boy, he said. What? If it was my relay, I'd place a booster buoy to increase resolution inside the nebula. He looked at Ace and Roy. Is that so stupid? No, Roy said as he hit several buttons. That's clever, rookie. That's very clever. He hit more buttons and second, smaller dot appeared. Based on the signature, it was indeed a boosted buoy. The Cylons had strategically placed it between several pockets of dense gas so that it could see, but not easily be seen. And there is it. Are you sure you're a rookie? Yes, sir. Let's presume that's not the only one, Roy, Ace said. Ice, tell the other 3 Raptors to prepare for Phase 2 and get ready to do some dancing. The interesting part is about to start. The 2 men nodded and set to their tasks, while Ace began putting the Widowmaker through a turn to avoid the booster buoy. Raptor 204, Cockpit Day 4570, 0948. It had been a roller coaster ride to get past the boys, but they were finally past the last one, so now Widowmaker could finally do the job she came here to do, spy on the relay. She was sitting behind a dense gas pocket and studying the situation. Ace counted 72 raiders, 2 troop transports, and 4 asteroid-mounted missile banks. The relay itself was also armed with 6 heavy cannons, which could take out Vipers and Raptors with a single shot. It was a defense setup with teeth, but it still felt wrong to Ace. There should be more. She bit her lip and turned to Roy. Anything from Outer Circuit. Outer Circuit was their code name for the other Raptors of the bunch. They were making a circuit around the area, 1 high, 1 middle, and 1 lower, while staying out of the Toaster's Dratties range. Their orders were to look for anything that was off. Roy's face, however, told her that they hadn't made a peep. Keep listening, Roy. He nodded, and she turned back. Ace took a deep breath and looked at the Dratties display. It appeared the Toasters still didn't know they were here. She just hoped that the Outer Circuit's folks were also still unnoticed. 2 seconds later, the wireless crackled with a coded burst. It lasted only 3 seconds, but that was enough for it to do what it had to. She could hear Roy's fingers fly over the keyboard. Well, Outer Circuit found the trap that comes with particular piece of cheese. He punched several buttons to bring a schematic up on the screen. There's a base star hiding in the nebula. It's only 1 jump away. If we had triggered one of those boys. Hold her steady, Ice, Ace said. I need to go in back. I've got her, Skipper. Ace let go of the controls and went in back. She studied the schematic on Roy's screen and cursed. It was a Mark Roman II base star. These ships had been introduced during the 10th year of the war. They had proved to a nasty piece of kit, costing the fleet many a ship. From the top of her head, however, the only one she could think of was the Battlestar Osiris, which had been lost during Battle of Jerba. She took a deep breath and bundled up her worries. Log it, Roy, she began. Then ready the FTL. It's time to get the frack out of here. Roy nodded and set to work. Ace returned to her chair and waited for him to start the countdown. She didn't have to wait long. 22 seconds later, the Widowmaker was gone. Battlestar Xanthi Commander's Quarters Day 4570, 0955. Williams sat behind his desk and looked at the data, won the first relay. The Wild Bunch had sent them a whole load of Dratties info on the target, along with several very clear photos of the base star, which the Wild Bunch had codenamed the Trap. The relay and its defenses had been codenamed the Cheese. The bunch was currently scouting the second relay, but he wanted to have his attack plan ready when they came back. He and Lucky had decided to split the work up to save time. Williams would do the math on one relay and Lucky on the other. The basic formula was really simple. They would jump in and nuke the trap to pieces. Once it was gone, they would head for the cheese and melt it. He wasn't taking any chances and using all 84 of his Vipers, along with all 36 of his Raptors. The Raptors would be armed with missile pods. "Are you sure about the Raptors, boss?" Peters said. The ship's XO was sitting on the other side of the desk. "The numbers favor us on this one." Yes, the toasters were smart enough to park the trap in the neighborhood. Williams began. Rule 1 in situations like this, never, ever underestimate the toasters, or they'll fry you like a piece of bread. He smiled. I paid attention to my predecessors, and that one is from Magnus. Steal from the best, so I'm taking notes on my meetings with you, Peters said with a snicker. Thanks for the compliment. Williams put away the photos and the Dratty's data, then he took out a blank piece of paper. He began drawing the situation. Okay, here's the detailed version I'm going to run by Lucky. Raptor 204, Cockpit Day 4570. 1002. Relay number 2 presented a whole new challenge. The cheese was located at the edge of the Caesar Nebula, which, if the nebula hadn't been there, would have put it in the perfect place to relay wireless contact between the 5 bases. But the nebula was there, and it interfered with the wireless channel between the cheese and 3 of the bases. So the toasters had been forced to build the eye. It was located smack in the middle of the nebula, inside an area clear of gases, like the eye of a storm, hence the name. The upside of this was that there were no booster buoys. Alas, the downside was that the toasters didn't need any. The eye had full Dratty's resolution. Worse, as they passed through the gas, they left a clear and obvious trail. Not to mention the fact that the gas directly around the Raptor lit up like a Capricorn eel. There was simply now was to get close to the eye without alerting the Cylons. Well, folks, Ace began, I'm open to suggestions. Roy, could we please bring up the chart on the pupil? Ice said. It might be helpful. One chart coming up. The eye existed because of the pupil. Above the Caesar Nebula was a star called Brutus, which the pupil, a rocky ice planet, orbited. The pupil cut through the nebula, absorbing enough gas to leave a clear area. The chart said that an orbit took 36.5 days. And according to the chart, the planet would begin its next passage in roughly 2 hours. Sometimes, there was no substitute for PDL, or as most people called it plain, dumb luck. And Ace knew that turning it away when came along was extremely stupid. Nice one, Ice, Ace said. Okay, we're hitching a ride. Ice, find us a spot where we can see the toasters, but they can't see us. Roy, let's jump out of here before they notice us. The 2 men nodded and set to their tasks. Ace just hoped that their luck would hold, because if she was the toasters, she would have secured the pupil to prevent them from doing what they were planning to do. Alas, they didn't have any other options, and there was only one way to find out. Before she could ponder it further, Roy began counting down to the jump. Battlestar Xanthi Sick Day 4570. 1030. Williams, Peters, and McIvers stood around the central tactical table. They had just received another burst transmission from the bunch. If their plan worked, it would take them several hours to gather the data they would need for the attack. McIvers was currently doing the math on how much time they were looking at. Finally, he shook his head. This plan is insane. Even if they managed to land without the toasters detecting them, they would have to spend 8 hours and 17 minutes on that rock. He scratched his face. They've got enough air and rations for the trip, but the chance of them being spotted. He shook his head. It's insane. Unfortunately, it's also the only plan we've got. Then the insane plan it is, Williams said. Major DeSalle, I want a countdown on the clock. Andrea DeSalle had been the Big X's weapons officer since she had been launched. Program it to hit 0 when the wild bunch can jump out. Yes, sir. DeSalle set the clock, while Peters turned to Williams. The look on his face told him that they both knew what the question was. Would they wait until the clock hit 0? Or would they attack the trap and the cheese now? There were risks with both options. If they waited, there was the chance of the toasters getting wise to the attack. If they attacked now, the toasters would probably send reinforcements to the eye, and that would put the wild bunch at even greater risk. Williams weighed the options in his head and made the call. Colonel McIvers, gather and brief your people, he said. Colonel Peters, give the chiefs a heads up. They're going to have to start getting the birds ready because I want to make a combat jump at 1300 hours. Yes, sir, Peters and McIvers said. Williams took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. All they could do now was prepare and beware. Chapter 10, The Idols of Martius. Raptor 204, Cockpit Day 4570, 1025. Roy had been smart enough to jump them in a good distance from the pupil. It had taken a tick over 22 minutes to get here at top sublight speed. So far, there was no sign of Cylon defenses around the planet, and that was worrying Ace. It was simply too easy. She would not have left such an obvious blind spot, and it made no sense that the toasters had. They're not that stupid, she muttered. Still nothing on Draddy's Roy. We're all alone out here, Skipper. I'm not reading any. As if on cue, the Draddy's screen beeped and 2 dots appeared. 2 raiders bearing 270 Carom 28. There were more beeps. We've found the pupil's defensive hot spot. I'm reading a satellite big enough to hold 24 raiders. If those 2 spot us, all hell will break loose. Ace put the Widowmaker through a sharp turn. This whole thing was a minefield, but they did have one advantage of the toasters. Their Draddies had longer range than the Cylon units. It gave them a fighting chance, but this was not going to be easy. Battlestar Xanthi Sick Day 4570, 1258. Their preparations were on schedule. The Raptors were armed and ready to go, while they had loaded all the Vipers into the launch tubes that they could. All in all, they had done what they could to prepare for their combat jump. Williams watched as the clock ticked past 12:58. Then he glanced at the countdown. It would still be several hours before the wild bunch could jump out of there. He hoped they would make it. But now he had other things to worry about. 30 seconds, sir, Major DeSalle said. The clock ticked on. It made it past 20 seconds, then 10, at which point the flight pods retracted and the FTL drive began counting down, and finally 5. Then at exactly 1300 hours, the ship jumped. Caesar Nebula Day 4570, 1300. Xanthi appeared exactly where she was supposed to. According to the data collected by the Wild Bunch, it was holding position inside a dense pocket of gas. They were using their thrusters to stay put. Williams had decided not risk an extended engagement here. The risk of them warning the Cylon forces at the Cheese or calling for reinforcement were simply too great. Xanthi was low on nuclear missiles. There were only 3 of them left, and those had been loaded into the missile tubes before the jump. They had apparently caught the base star by surprise. Before they could launch their raiders, Xanthi launched one of her nukes and annihilated her. Then she jumped again. Viper 1105 Cockpit Day 4570, 1302. McIvers put his Viper through another sharp turn, with Fancy right behind him. Although they were outnumbered, the Cylons were putting up a good fight. And the weapons on the relay itself were giving them plenty to do as well. He checked the Draddy's display to see how Xanthi was doing. The Big X had the guns to take the relay with just a couple of shots. Alas, the fighter jumble was between them and the target. Before he could check it out further, a raider appeared right in front of him. He pushed the stick to left, and 1105 rolled. Bullets whizzed left and right of him, but none hit. Still with me, Fancy. =/back/= yes, boss. =/back/=. Good. Lucky fired back at the toasters. He managed to clip it, but the raider kept going. It fired another salvo. He put 1105 through a turn, and the rounds missed. Before the raider could fire a third salvo, it was hit by large caliber fire that came out of nowhere. Lucky checked the angle and realized what had happened. The relay had tried to take Fancy out, but she had used the raider as a shield. They continued to close on the relay. The good news was there were no more raiders between them and the relay. The bad news was that the relay was firing everything she could muster at Lucky and Fancy. Raptor 204 Cockpit Day 4570, 1304. The satellite hadn't nuked them. Yet, it was slowly inching towards the other side of the Dratty's screen. Ace figured it would be another 2 minutes before the Cylons were gone, but then something bad happened. The satellite launched all of her raiders. Ace cursed and was about to wake up Ice when Roy put a hand on her shoulder and pointed to the display. The raiders were FTL jumping away. Ace couldn't believe what she's seeing. "What the hell?" she said. "Since when do raiders have jump drives?" "I don't know," Roy began, "but this is going to come back and bite us in the ass." He scratched his face. "For now, however, I'm more worried about where those raiders went." "Well, we're not going to find out sitting here. Wake up Ice, we're going to find us some answers." Roy nodded and went to wake Ice, while Ace made her way to the pilot's seat and began prepping Widowmaker for launch. She didn't have an exact plan in her head, but she figured she could make something up as they went along. Viper 1105, Cockpit Day 4570, 1305. 19 missiles hit the relay, taking out a considerable chunk of it. The whole thing began to spiral out of control, putting considerable stress on the space frame. It hadn't been easy to get Fancy into position, but as they had approached the relay, they had been joined by other Raptors and Vipers. While Lucky and the others, who had managed to break away from the fighter jumble, had provided cover fire to keep the relay busy, Fancy had hit the relay with everything she had left. =/back/= I'm out, boss. =/back/=. "Nice shooting, Fancy," he began. "Now, boys and girls, let's..." Before he could finish the sentence, 2 large explosions rocked the relay. The relay had spiraled straight into Xanthi's sight, and she was using her cannons to finish the job Fancy had started. 3 more shots hit, and then the relay exploded. When the light faded, there was nothing left except for a few pieces of scrap metal. Lucky looked at the Dratty's display. The screen only showed colonial signatures. They had one. Raptor 204, Cockpit Day 4570, 1305. Ice looked at the Dratty's display and bit his lower lip. What he was seeing was wrong. Really, really wrong. A sight like should be crawling with patrols, but there was nothing. Except for the base satellite, which was oddly silent, the Dratty's display was empty. At the moment, they were flying low above the surface of the pupil, but he had feeling they wouldn't stay there. So he did the math on how long it would take them to reach the relay at full sublight speed. 47 seconds to get the relay into Dratty's range, he said. "In theory, we should be able to get a scan from outside the relay's weapons range. Are you sure you want to do this, boss?" "I know, theory is very different real life sometimes, and even at maximum range, there's a good chance we'll get blown to pieces. But if they've all left, then all hell is about to break loose somewhere else. I presume we have a plan B." "The FTL is plan B," Roy said. "We're spun and ready to go. Just give the word and we'll jump back to the cheese." It was a gamble, presuming that the big X would there, but it was the best they could do. "How long until we pull away from the pupil?" "Let's put 30 seconds on the clock." Roy nodded and programmed the clock. "And, mark." The clock began to count down. As soon as it hit 0, Ace pulled back on the stick and took them straight towards the relay. Ice looked at the Dratty's display, but nothing appeared. It made him really nervous. Finally, the relay appeared on the screen, and it was unguarded. Ice cursed like an experienced flyboy. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Ace and Roy managed to exchange looks and smiles. Their rookie was going through a serious learning curve in a very short time. 2 seconds later, Ace's console beeped. "The relay has locked weapons onto us. Roy, time to jump." "Clock is running," Roy said. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, jump." And with that, the wild bunch was gone from the eye. Battlestar Xanthi Sick Day 4570, 1306. They were collecting their birds and making the tally, but at least so far it appeared that all their birds had made it through this one. The toasters had not been so lucky. Every single one of their raiders had been reduced to pieces, and the relay had gone up like a Capricorn candle. He turned to Peters, who was talking to Fixer on his handset. Finally, he put the unit down. "What's the count, Zach?" "The good news is that we didn't lose any flyers," he said. "But we have 16 Vipers and 4 Raptors in need of some serious repair, and we're still bringing in birds, so you can expect that count." His sentence was cut off by 4 signatures appearing at the edge Draddy's range. But that was not the problem. The problem was that they were colonial signatures. Williams recognized them right away. It was the Wild Bunch, and that meant that something had gone very, very wrong over at the Eye. He turned to Lieutenant Jonas at Communications. Jonas had once been an engineer, but after the previous communications, Chief Master Chief Petty Officer Alex McVeigh had transferred to Fleet HQ. Jonas had gotten the job. "Jonas, open a channel to Ace." "Channel open." "Xanthi actual to Raptor 204, he said into his handset. "Report." // Ace here, actual. // Byron's voice came over the wireless. // The scout mission to the Eye went sideways, sir. We were sneaking in when the Cylons suddenly all bugged out. // Williams and Peters exchanged looks. The only reason they would do that if they were rallying their forces for an offensive of some kind. // I made the call to come back here and raise the alarm. // Get your birds aboard, Ace. We're getting out of here now. // Wilco, sir. // Williams put the handset down, cutting the channel. Ace had made the right call, jumping out of there. They needed to hit the Eye, then warn the fleet that the Cylons were about to hit them. He turned to Peters, and the two have got to work. Caesar Nebula Day 4570, 1315. Xanthi jumped into the Eye. The relay opened fire right away. But the Battlestar had more firepower and better armor. She steamrolled over the Cylon station like she was made out of tissue paper. 2 seconds later, 4 Mark Roman 2 base stars jumped in. They immediately opened fire with everything they had and began launching her raiders. The Battle of the Eye had just begun in earnest. Battlestar Xanthi Sick Day 4570, 1316. The Big X was getting pounded from all sides, and she would not last long under this bombardment. Worse, the toasters had them surrounded. Williams decided that they had nothing to lose. "Zach, tell all gunners to open fire. DeSalle, launch both our nukes." "Yes, sir," came the replies. Xanthi launched her last 2 nukes. The first warhead hit one of the base stars and vaporized it. Warhead number 2 missed its original target, but kept going and hit another base star. This left the Xanthi with a hole to escape the gauntlet, and Williams didn't waste any time. He turned to the helm and gave the order to get them out of the kill zone. While all this happened, the weapons grid was sparing with base star number 3 and shooting down as many raiders as she could. But she was still losing. Williams grabbed his intercom handset. "Actual to Fixer. // Fixer here. We're launching birds as fast as we can, sir. // Launch the Raptors as well. We need..." That was as far as he got before a load shriek indicated that the comm line had gone dead. "Frack." "Radiological alarm," DeSalle said. "I'm reading 3 nuclear missiles on the 4th base star, sir." Williams suppressed another curse. 2 seconds later, the missiles hit and hellfire washed over the Xanthi. The ship shook and rattled, and the hull breached in multiple places. Entire sections were vented to space, while a major fire erupted in the midship section, and people suffered radiation poisoning. Down in CIC, consoles sparked and fell over. Williams was thrown through the room and ended up landing against the communications station. He got back on his feet, not noticing the small piece of metal that fell from his pocket. It was a 1-qubit coin. 2 seconds later, the ship rocked again. The last thing Tyler Williams ever saw was a rain of electrical sparks from the communications station. Battlestar Xanthi sick day 4570, 1319. The commander fell to the deck, electrocuted, and part of Zachary Peters couldn't believe it, but a bigger part of him said that he still had a job to do. Normally, a Jupiter-class Battlestar like the Xanthi could take 3 hits. But the base star had been close, and all 3 missiles had been targeted at the exact same spot in the midship zone. And the raiders from the base stars were also firing at the Big X, despite the best efforts by the gunners and the air wing. Then 2 of the main guns were blown to pieces, creating a hole in the ship's defenses. The Cylons immediately hit that section. "Hull breach on deck 7, sir," DeSalle said. "We have a fire spreading towards the fuel supply, sir. Get our people out of there and vent those sections." Before DeSalle could relay the order, the other base star launched her nuclear missiles. There were 2 of them, and Peters recognized them for what they were, a death blow. There wouldn't be time to evacuate the ship, just an explosion and silence. He watched as the missiles closed and braced for the end. And then, just before impact, there was a flash. Battlestar Anubis sick day 4570, 1319. The attack on Proteus Outpost had gone according to plan. In fact, it had been too easy. There had been a lot less raiders they then had expected, and Anubis together with Loki and Berserk had waltzed over the place. Her co-commander Klaus Donovan had smelled trouble. So instead of jumping back to base, they had jumped to the cheese. When they had found nothing but debris there, they had jumped to the eye, and it had turned out to be just in time. The Big X had jumped into an ambush. They had just shot down 2 nukes that had been heading straight for the Big X. "Prepare the nukes," he said to his weapons officer, "and target the base star to port." "Yes, sir." Loki and Berserk were already hitting said base star with all their firepower. Now Anubis joined in. Being an Orion-class Battlestar, she was not meant to fight alone. But if there was one thing that this war had taught Donovan, it was that sometimes you had to forget the rulebook and just do. And between the 3 of them, the colonial ships were incurring some major damage on their target. Finally, a beep announced that the nukes were ready to go. "Fire!" Anubis launched 2 nukes, 1 for each base star, and Donovan bit his lower lip. The first warhead hit the starboard base star in the central section and vaporized it. The second missed its target, but detonated close enough to give it a massive wallop. It spiraled out of control, allowing the Anubis and company to descend upon it. Between them and the Big X, the base star didn't last long. That done, they began targeting the many raiders swarming around the place. Battlestar Xanthi sick day 4570, 1321. Anubis had saved the Big X from the nukes, but she was not of the woods yet. The good news was that the crew had managed to vent the midship section that had been one fire. The bad news was that they were still taking heavy fire from raiders. Worse, the Big X's FTL drive was offline. So getting out was not an option anymore. Even if the drive had been working, in their current condition jumping would have been far too dangerous. Between the nukes and the raiders, the Big X had suffered 23 hull breaches. Peters looked up to see 3 more raiders vanish from the Dratty's screen. "How are our boys and girls doing?" Peters asked Jonas. "I can't tell, sir," Jonas began. "Our wireless system is damaged and the Cylons are jamming like crazy, sir." Anubis had launched all her birds, which had cut loose as soon as they could. But even with the reinforcements, their Vipers and Raptors were still outnumbered 4-1, and as much as he hated it to admit it, there was nothing he could about that. What he could do, however, was make sure that there would still be a bird farm for them to return to. He made his way to what was left of the damaged control panel and got busy. Battlestar Anubis sick day 4570, 1322. They were slowly but steadily thinning out the raiders. Donovan looked up at the Dratty's display. Their orders had been to be back at base at 1310 hours. But at 1310, they had been at the cheese where they had stayed for 8 minutes before jumping to the eye. He had ordered his weapons officer, Captain Zane Paulson, to put up a clock. It was at 12 minutes and ticking. "Helm, keep us bobbing and weaving." "Yes, sir," came the reply. "Come on, you paranoid misfit. Send them in already." Anubis and company were based at Gamma Ray Base, a shipyard in orbit of Trevor, which was a moon of Sagittarian. It was commanded by a really paranoid admiral called Valance. And besides the 3 ships here, it was also home to 2 Valkyrie-class Battlestars, Valkyrie and Yashuman. Donovan had gambled that if they missed their scheduled arrival time, Valance would send those 2 ships after them. Or this is going to end badly. They kept shooting down raiders for another 2 minutes. Then 2 more signatures appeared at the edge of Draddy's range. It didn't take the computer long to identify them. Valkyrie and Yashuman had arrived. Donovan knew there would be hell to pay later, but for now, he was glad that they were here. They launched their Vipers and opened fire. 8 minutes later, the Battle of the Eye was over. 11 Lazarus days. Battlestar Xanthi sick day 4570, 1400. Xanthi was in horrible shape. They had lost a lot of good people, including the commander, and the ship itself was badly damaged. As for her birds, that was even worse. Only 27 of her Vipers and 3 of her Raptors had survived the mad scramble. Those survivors were currently gathered aboard the Yashuman because both flight pods had decompressed. Peters was overseeing the collection of the bodies when Petty Officer Jennifer O'Connell walked into the room. She had a nasty cut down her left cheek, and her face was covered in soot and dirt. Peters also knew that she hated having to come down to CIC, preferring to spend her time with the planes. If she came to CIC, it was bad. He struggled to keep the emotion out of his voice as he asked, "Fixer." She shook her head. Peters looked into her eyes and he could sense her question. O'Connell had come up here to ask about the air wing. However, the look on his face made the question unnecessary. A tear rolled down her face and she looked away. Peters let out a sigh loaded with darkness, then went back to work. Battlestar Xanthi Corridor Day 4570, 1400. Major Gaius Nash navigated the halls of the Big X as if it was a minefield. He had managed to get his hand on a Raptor and dock it at an airlock. Now he was making his way to CIC. There were dead crew members all over the place, and the extensive damage made the corridors unsafe. But that didn't keep the medics from doing their job. He felt a pang of pride as 2 orderlies came rushing by, carrying a wounded knuckle dragger. Then his attention was taken by a loose electrical cable. He dodged it and finally reached his destination. Bloody hell. CIC was in pieces. There were bodies covered in sheets, and a lot of the consoles were damaged. Jennifer O'Connell was standing next to the helm, frozen like a statue. And the fact that Zachary Peters appeared to running things told Nash enough about the commander's fate. He took a deep breath and turned to O'Connell. "Petty officer," she remained frozen in place. "Petty officer," again, nothing happened, so he decided to try something else. Jennifer, are you still with us?" She blinked twice, then she looked at him. "Gaius, you're alive." She threw her arms around him, something that normally would have been extremely out of character for her. Of all the knuckle draggers, O'Connell was the biggest stickler for protocol, but today was far from normal. "Thank the gods, you alive." "I'm alive," he said, gently untangling her, "and I need a status report." He said it with a professional yet gentle calm. "What's our girl's condition?" Her professionalism slowly slipped back into place. "It's bad. It'll take 3 weeks in dry dock just to repair the flight pods, and that's presuming we can jump her to the nearest facility, which right now." Before she could finish, the communications station beeped. Lieutenant Jonas had spent the time since the attack puzzling it back together, and now it was finally fully functional again. The console's built-in printer/decoder immediately spit out several messages. Jonas collected them and began reading. The last message made him curse. Nash and O'Connell joined him. "What is it?" O'Connell asked. Jonas offered them the message and Nash took it, holding it so that O'Connell could also read. It was an order from Fleet Headquarters. They were to abandon the Xanthi. The Admiralty had, for some reason, decided not to salvage the Big X. Gaius cursed and shook his head. To him, it made 0 sense. What the hell was the brass thinking? He exchanged looks with O'Connell and Jonas, then turned away. Peters was talking to several junior officers, directing them as part of the repair efforts. After what felt like forever, he finished and looked at Nash. "Major, you should read this, sir." Nash gave Peters the message and watched as the colonel read it. When he finished, he looked up and sighed. Then, he grabbed the intercom handset. "All hands, this is the XO," he began. "By order of the Admiralty, we are to abandon ship. I repeat, all hands abandon ship." He put the handset down. "Blast, bloody brass idiots." He ran his hand through his hair, then turned the CIC crew. They were all staring at him. "You heard the order, people. Abandon ship." Peters put the handset back in its cradle, closing the line. There was a moment of silence, then the CIC crew set to executing the order. And thus ended the wartime service of the Battlestar Xanthi. Her crew was evacuated. What supplies and spare parts could be salvaged were taken, while the ship was powered down. And forgotten. Lazarus Raptor 001 Cockpit 730 days BCH 0711. Antonia Lazarus looked out the window and whistled. The Caesar Nebula was pretty. Alas, it was also were large and very close to the armistice line, so most folks, fleet and civilians, steered clear of the place. But Lazarus Shipyards was on the edge of bankruptcy. Last year, Antonia's father, Victor Lazarus, had passed away. Up until then, things had been going well. But afterwards, the company's accountant, a piece of slime called Romulus Paxton, had emptied all their accounts and done a runner. The latest rumor was he was hiding on Geminin. Antonia had managed to land several small contracts since then. It had been enough to keep the company from sinking completely. But in order to truly salvage the company, they needed a big contract. And rumor had it there was a massive piece of salvage floating somewhere in the Caesar Nebula. So Antonia had sent the company's 3 Raptors to go look for it. She had been sitting in the back, watching the Draddy's display. And then a contact had appeared. So now she was standing between Alexandria Newton and Remus Paxton. Alex was the Lazarus best pilot, and Remus was their best engineer. Remus was also Romulus' twin brother. When Remus had found out what his brother had done, he had offered to resign. But Antonia wouldn't have it. "How are we doing, Remus?" she said while looked at him. "Looks like we found our pot of gold, Skipper." Antonia peered into the nebula again. Slowly, a silhouette appeared in the gas. Then Alex took them through a dense cloud of gas. The shape vanished for a second, but then came back as a crystal-clear shadow. And the shape was exactly what it should be. The outline of a Jupiter-class Battlestar. A huge grin formed on Alex's face. "Hello, Xanthi." "The Big X," Remus began, in her full glory. Alex took the Raptor closer, and the Xanthi was indeed revealed in her full glory. She was damaged and battered, but in her mind's eye, Antonia could see what sea had been like before. The old wreck was oozing potential and hope. After taking a deep breath, she turned to Alex and told her to take the Raptor in. It was time to see what condition she was in on the inside. Battlestar Xanthi Corridor, 730 days BCH, 1205. They had been taking a survey of the Xanthi. The ship had taken a serious pounding and the damage was extensive. In order to speed things up, the 2 other Raptors had been shuttling in extra people for the last hour. Nevertheless, it was slow work. Antonia was in a spacesuit, making her way to CIC. Remus was right behind her. After what seemed like forever, they stepped into the room. The bodies had been removed, as had been the supplies, but it was still a mess. "This is going to take a lot of work," Remus said. "You love a challenge, Remus," Antonia began. And I know you'll get it done." Remus grinned. Antonia looked around the CIC and noticed something small and shiny on the floor. It wasn't easy, but she managed to pick it up. It was a 1-qubit coin, an old one, which she figured dated from the Cylon War. She figured it was a good omen. Antonia pocketed it and then went back to work. Fleet Headquarters, Admiral Nagala's office, 120 days BCH, 0759. Commander Gaius Nash hated dress uniforms. The last time he had been in one had been when he had taken command of the Valkyrie. It was a post he had landed after her previous commander William Adama had been reassigned to Galactica. He had not met Adama that time, but he had met Adama a long time ago. It had been just after Operation Raptor Talon. Adama had crashed on an ice planet, and he had been flying the SAR Raptor sent to recover him. He had found the young Viper pilot next to a Cylon facility. Adama had told him that the toasters had been experimenting on people inside the place. Gaius had gone inside and checked the place out. What he had seen inside had given him the chills. After returning to the Galactica, where he had been based for Operation Raptor Talon, he had written a full report on the place, which the Admiralty had ignored. And that was another reason he was no big fan of being here. Nash did not like the Admiralty. But Admiral Lexington Nagala had ordered him to here, so he had shown up. At exactly 0800, Nagala walked into the office and sat down behind his desk. He gestured for Nash to take a seat while he did. Nash leaned back and waited for Nagala to hit him with whatever he was here for. "Before we get into the dreary details of why you are here, how is Jennifer?" "She's doing fine, sir," Nash said. "She's enjoying her assignment aboard the Triton, sir." Nash had married Jennifer O'Connell 2 years after war. They were still married and had 3 children. The oldest 2, Klaus and Zachary, were lawyers on Sagittarian, while their youngest, Ingrid, had followed in her parents' footsteps and was the chief LSO aboard the Battlestar Pegasus. As for Jennifer, she was the XO of the Triton. "Glad to hear that." Nagala leaned forward. "Now, let's get to business," he paused. "I have a new assignment for you, Gaius." Nash frowned. He was a little over 6 months away from retiring. Well, technically, he still had 2 years to go, but he had tons of leave coming, and if he took it all in one big lump, he would be able to leave active duty much sooner. Nagala handed him a folder. Nash opened it and blinked. "Xanthi, but the last time I saw the Big X." He remembered the sight of the damaged ship as he had seen it from the Raptor that had taken him away. She was in pieces. How? I thought the Admiralty had forgotten all about her. To be honest, we had, but Lazarus Shipyards needed a miracle. Nash read on and spotted several paragraphs about Lazarus Shipyards and their operations. He made a mental note to read the whole report. "And we need a replacement for the Alexander." Alexander was a support ship assigned to training duty. She had a crew of 1,500. 800 of those were regular fleet personnel, and the rest were trainees. "Her capacity is too small. Fleet Academy has been cutting corners." Nash nodded. He had heard rumors about this situation. The current recruiting numbers were very good. In order to keep the system from choking up, the training time had been cut short, and that had led to incidents. Unless something radical was done, it would become a major issue. "What will the ratio be?" 3,000 fleet personnel and 2,000 trainees. Nagala began while handing him another folder. "Here's a start. The crew of the Alexander, they are to form the core of your crew, and supplemented by your choices, Commander." He paused and leaned back. "Good luck, Gaius," and dismissed. Nash took the folders, saluted, and headed out. He had plenty of homework to do. But as he walked out, that was not on his mind. He had been given command of the Xanthi. He remembered his days aboard the Big X during the Cylon War. It seemed like a lifetime ago. But that didn't change the fact that he would happy to be aboard the old girl again. He grinned and headed for the exit. Battlestar Xanthi, sick 90 days BCH, 0800. Antonia Lazarus walked around CIC and smiled. Her people had done excellent work. The room was identical to the current CIC of Galactica, and it was fully operational. But more importantly, it was now fully manned for the first time. Over the last few days, the permanent crew had been arriving, while the bulk of Antonia's people had been moving out. But before the Big X was officially reactivated, she had to undergo a 90-day shakedown cruise. Which was why Antonia and 29 of her people, including Remus, were staying aboard. Since they had done the rebuild, the Lazarus Shipyards folks would be able to troubleshoot if anything went wrong. Lazarus settled at the command and control table. As she did so, Commander Nash walked into CIC. He was followed by Colonel Bert O'Neill, the ship's XO. The colonel had been the commanding officer of the Alexander. How the man had made colonel was beyond her. He was rude, condensing, and arrogant. She had asked around about the man, and found that she was not the only one who thought that he was not the best leader in the fleet. "What is she doing here?" O'Neill snapped. "Her job," Nash said, with his tone making it clear that he was not taking any nonsense from O'Neill. The commander took his post at the command and control table, while O'Neill stood on the other side. Lazarus settled to the right of the commander. Nash turned to the navigational station. "Ensign Walters, we are jumping to Sector 27. Sound condition 2 and begin jump prep." "Yes, sir." Walters set to work. Xanthi was currently still in the Caesar Nebula. Lazarus Shipyards had put her in a stable orbit around the pupil and then built scaffolding around her during the repairs. When the work was done, the scaffolds had been dismantled. The Caesar Nebula filled the bulk of Sector 26, which meant that Nash had ordered them to make a one-sector jump. From there, they would make their way to the Palmer sector, where they would put the Xanthi through her paces. While Walters did her thing, Nash turned to Lazarus. "Time to transfer command, Miss Lazarus." Antonia nodded and reached into her inner pocket. She took out a piece of paper. It was the official transfer contract. She had signed, and once Nash did, Xanthi would be his ship. She handed him the paper and a pen. He signed the contract and offered both to her. Antonia took the contract, putting it back in her pocket, but not the pen. "It's a gift. Speaking of which," she reached into her trouser pocket and took out the 1-cubit coin she had found in CIC. "I believe this belongs to you now, Commander." "Where did you get this?" Nash said as he took the coin. "I found it on the floor," Antonia began, "next to the communications station." Nash ran his thumb across the old coin. His face made it crystal clear that he was remembering something, and that the coin was something special. Before Lazarus could ask about it, Ensign Walters began running the final FTL checklist. The commander pocketed the coin and the pen. As he did so, the flight pods were being retracted. Xanthi was ready to jump. "Board is green," Walters said, "ready to jump." "Start the clock." Walters made her way to FTL station and grabbed the intercom horn. "All hands, prepare for immediate jump. Repeat, prepare for immediate jump." The coordinates were already programmed, so she stuck jump key into its slot and turned it. "Clock is running, 10, 9. The CIC crew prepared for the jump. 3, 2, 1, jump. A bright flash lit up the Caesar Nebula as Xanthi jumped out. And 90 days later, her Lazarus days were over. And the 12 colonies of Kabul fell while the Xanthi survived. But that was another story for another time. The end.